So this is Don Harder.
Ken Lee.
And we're here to recap the top 3 tweets from March 2012. So, the very first, with 1,923 reads, is one that we tweeted kind of earlier in the month of March, but it's called Fake Science, and it's a Tumblr blog. We tweeted this because we thought it was kind of fun at the time, but then after some discussion, Ken Lee and I discovered that there's something deeper about this site than that maybe was originally intended as kind of a fun piece of science, but there's something a little bit deeper here that we wanted to kind of discuss.
Yeah, and maybe if we don't mind taking a step back, we always seem to have a theme that we uncover, and I think we're probably getting there because this site, which looks at kitschy science posters, there's this one that has a poster of the Earth and the moon not too far from it, and a bunch of what look like to be little elephants connecting the Earth and the moon. And the poster reads, "Neat nature facts. Imagine if we took every elephant in the world and laid them end to end into space, ... Did you know that all the elephants would die?" So this, I think the theme here is to me, is accessibility. And making science accessible means making it fun, articulating it in a way that will get the public interested, not just scientists, but everybody. And that's something that we as marketers should really consider, is how to make our science accessible, meaningful, significant, important, fun, entertaining. All these things that sometimes we're not. So this particular Tumblr.com, what do you think? What did you get from this in terms of marketing, just in general?
Well, and I kind of look at this as you said, like I'm not a huge science geek. I mean, I geek out on certain things, but one of the things that I think probably is a bit of a stereotype is that science people can tend to be, a little bit dry. And it's kind of like when I start talking about cars, people glaze over and they're like, "Oh, that's really nice. I just like the color red." But, this site, there's kind of a good thing going on here in that, because some of the things, like the elephant one, to me is like, well, duh. But it's kind of obvious. Like some people overanalyze that. But what I like about this site is that from a brand standpoint, I see it as a very good way of building brands, building that kind of the fun side. So for example, we talked a little bit about how we look at Red Bull and their latest campaigns to really push. They're not pushing. When you watch a Red Bull ad or a Red Bull commercial or a snippet on YouTube, you don't feel like you're being sold Red Bull. Red Bull's name is mentioned, but you're seeing people doing extreme sports. Mm-hmm. So that brand starts to become associated with extreme and energy and really positive words, even though that drink itself is kind of like rock god. It does bad things to you. But that's kind of how I feel about the Fake Science blog. I could see one of our clients, for example, embracing an idea similar to this, which is pure fun, and kind of building some association with the brand. If your brand is all about becoming accessible or becoming easy to reach or easy to talk to, this is a great example of how one of the many ways that you can really pay off on that of your brand essence. And I'm sure that this is just kind of I'm pretty sure this is a random scientist who's doing something like this and is just having a bit of fun with it. There's no marketing tool necessarily here. There's some ads and things like that on here, but it's nothing, it's nothing overly sold. I think this is pure fun.
Right, there's nothing underneath his sleeve.
Exactly. And that's what it feels like too, and I think that's also important.
The experience, I think, when you talk about Red Bull, and I see their videos, because they have a movie house that is now profitable. Mm-hmm. Usually marketing firms, they don't build, or in-house or agency, they're not building movie firms, but they really embraced this and invested in it, and the experience that they're giving to their audience is, I think, genuine.
Yes.
And that's the experience. It's fake science, but you're getting a genuine experience.
Yeah.
And I think of that when I think of back in 2007, Bio-Rad did this Rethink PCR. Mm-hmm. And it's not Bio-Rad. There's no Bio-Rad logo there. It's just scientists. If you had to reinvent PCR, what would you do? And what makes this work is that almost every scientist has a PCR machine in their lab. They've experienced the frustrations, they've gone, oh, if only I had, and then this allows them to vent those in a creative, productive way. Somebody said, I think PCR is, and what does it stand for? Ponder, cycle, and regret, right? So, do you feel the emotion there?
Right.
You don't even have to be a scientist to understand, like, ponder, cycle, regret. You can understand the connections that scientists have with PCR. It did have a marketing end goal to this. It was to get exposure, connection between Bio-Rad and something that people are connected to, PCR. But also, at the end of the day, they're getting names. They're getting names of people who are passionate about PCR.
Yeah, and to kind of add on to what you just said about the goals.
Yeah.
So, sometimes our goal is to make some sort of a conversion from this experience to a sale, or this experience to download something. But in some instances, our goals are a little bit more, a little bit higher up in the buy cycle, and it's just pure awareness. And then start to get your brand out there and to start to understand what you're about. These are other, this is a way to kind of do that. If you want to be accessible, for example, your return on investment for something like that is more of mind space. It's not something tangible like dollars or buying something. I mean, this is another way of absolutely doing that.
If you were to think about the entire funnel, as you said, and that's what you should do. Awareness, it starts at the lip. But then if we think about marketing, and the most powerful part about marketing is if I were to say, hey, did you see Hunger Games? Wow. No, Ken, tell me about it. Now you've got your friend, I think, Ken Lee, telling you about something that now is motivating you to perhaps go see something. So it's that peer-to-peer, and it's that sharing. And what I like, just bringing back to Rethink PCR, when I Google this, the original site is down, but all these blogs about it are still up. So something, I'm just reading some other ones that I relate to. PCR stands for Patients Checking Reaction. So you can feel the frustration, patients checking reaction. And there's all these comments about PCR and all these blogs about this original site. So there is an emotional gut check here. It's awareness, but I think that's how an ad appeals too, right? Is if you can really pull at someone's emotional strings, then you have a recipe, I think, for doing something like sharing. And in science, we know that peer-to-peer is, and in general, marketing, not just science marketing, that's one of the best things you can do is to get a endorsement from a peer.
Absolutely.
Should we go to the next? Tweet. What are the tweets?
Yeah. So this one had 1,734 reads. It was tweeted just a few days ago, in fact. How to write like a scientist.
And this was in the life and career section of Science magazine, and this hits home for me.
I thought it would.
Yeah, scientists aren't normally known as writers. They're known as thinkers, very careful, very logical, and the writing part sort of reflects on that. The results, the materials and methods, maybe, but the data is just get to the data, speak to it, and move on, and do it in things, in ways, I guess, that might not be easy to crack for somebody who's just picking up a science paper. I remember the word quiescent. I learned that in science. There are a lot of words that you need to look up in the dictionary, but putative is another word I've learned, putative. But what's interesting, how to write like a scientist pokes fun at writing like a scientist. The author actually is told by his PI, his boss in the lab, you don't write like a scientist. And it was not meant as a compliment. And he goes on, and it's really a fun way of looking at some of the ways that scientists do write and poking fun at that. Here's one. I'm gonna just pull out. He like does a top 10 list Some journals, number 3, such as Science, officially eschew the passive voice. Others print only the passive voice, so find a healthy compromise in what he calls writing in a semi-passive voice. So his examples, active voice, we did this experiment. Passive voice, which is how he says scientists write. This experiment was done by us. So the compromise between the active and passive is the semi-passive voice. Done by us, this experiment was, right? So
nice impression.
That is a terrible impression. But anyways, yes, for the semi-passive voice, you want to emulate Yoda. Yoda, you want to emulate. I can't do that. But
No,
anyways, yes,
good.
okay.
Sounds good.
So anyways, the other one is my favorite here, Don. I don't know if you want to talk about it. Is number 12. If you're co-authoring a paper, the first author is the weary graduate student who spent hours doing the work. And the second author is his counterpart in the lab, the resentful graduate student who thinks he or she spent hours doing the work. The third author is this undergraduate, just happy to be named. The fourth collaborator is a collaborator nobody ever met. The fifth author is a postdoctoral fellow who just made a passing remark on the subject. And the sixth author, for some reason, Vladimir Putin. So,
I would include him in all my papers as well.
You get a lot of citations, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
A lot of notoriety for that. So, what did you think about this article? But I think it speaks to accessibility.
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting because a lot of the papers that I've seen are written this way, and it's kind of like, oh, I have to print that out, and then I'll have to have my dictionary nearby, like you said. But I think the gist of this article, the thing that I absolutely love is, yes, the poking fun, but it's that last sentence or that last paragraph, which I think really kind of talks about, or really shares how we feel as marketers as well. And this is the line that I really was most drawn to. And it's this is, in fact, one of the most appealing aspects of science. We're more than just the people who push the pipette buttons. We're advocates who get to construct and tell the stories about our science. I can't think of a better lone career.
Which is absolutely the take-home message of this article. I have on my desktop saved you could almost call it an article. I'm showing this to you, but it was actually a press release. And people think, are the press releases dead? No, content is never going to be dead, written or visual. But I think public information officers at universities do this best. They have a story to tell, and they're going to empower their reader and entertain the reader. And this, people go, oh, press releases, they should be 1 page long. Yeah, if they're boring, they should actually be nothing. They shouldn't exist. This is about 2.5 pages talking about MIT's new open courseware nominated by Science. They actually get to that award being announced from Science to MIT in the 5th paragraph. In the first paragraph, they set it up like a story. They give context as to why this award was created. And it really sets up the rest of the piece. So when you hear somebody said, we're thrilled to receive this award, the context has already been set. A lot of times press releases don't do that. They just say, we're happy to announce. But here it actually says, you would think that MIT the alumni would be angry that they're opening up their courses, something that they paid for. And then it later says, we're thrilled that we can open up our courses. And they set up that kind of tension, things that stories have. And they have different people being interviewed as you would in an article. You could see this easily being in print, as is, and that's what, and going back to PR, AP, all these people that slim down news staff, they want to take a story like this and be able to push this out. And they could, something like this, print it as is, with little editing. And then you've succeeded as a PR person, not only in communicating, but getting that into a newspaper as is, messages intact. And it's interesting how a lot of press releases will go, I think Science Magazine, something very overt, and instead they talk about how this will help them reach teachers because it's being promoted in a magazine such as Science, because Science has a lot of credibility. Do you see the difference there between Science is awesome to weaving it into a story and making it authentic, kind of like Red Bull, what we talked about?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a word that has come up a few times with one of our clients, and that's kind of stuck in my head for a little bit. It's this idea of authenticity. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen the press releases. I've seen the evolution of even print stories in newspapers kind of changing and setting up that little bit of drama, a little bit of tension in the beginning. And I'm really...
it's that emotion again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing that I feel like, and not to kind of honk on competitive group, but that's our line, right? Bringing life to life sciences.
Yes.
And I think that's how you get people. That's how you get people interested and hook them in and start telling that bigger story.
So what's the third story? It's a fun, light story, and not surprisingly, it's a video.
Oh yes. So the third story was actually tweeted to us by one of our own staffers, Petru. It's on extracting your own DNA, and it's part of the Nova series. And this one just made it. It was tweeted towards the beginning of the month. 514 people really liked this one. As Ken mentioned, this is a video, but it's a video without words. We watched it a few times, and one of the things that we came out with it is that it's one of those things that really makes science accessible. There's all this talk in the news, and there has been for a few decades, and it's become more mainstream, but this idea of genetics and DNA, and here's this video that comes out with some simple household ingredients. You can extract your own DNA. And they go through this quick little 2 and 3/4 minute video on how to do that. And it's actually very entertaining. It's all words. There's no talking. It's just music and demonstration.
It's a common procedure in the lab to extract DNA. In this case, the 2.5 minutes covers a lady basically taking some salt water, rinsing her mouth out to get cheek cells, and then breaking the cells open with detergent, just liquid detergent used to wash the dishes with, and then she adds some alcohol, in this case isopropyl alcohol, and some food coloring so you can visualize the event, and she stirs that around, and you can see the visible strands of DNA, and that's something we do in the lab every day. And what I liked about this is, like any show that, like Carl Sagan, what he used to do with space, and what this Nova episode was doing with DNA is making it real. And if you want to, like anything, get people interested in a subject, you start them young. You don't do it with the textbook. You don't do it with a lecture. You do it with the demonstration and making it. We talked about connections before. Connecting it with something. This is something you could do at home with your child. I can imagine if I were working at Illumina and my kid was saying, "What do? I sequence DNA and I drew a bunch of letters," or even if I drew a diagram, it would not make wouldn't it be as meaningful to them as doing something like this experiment, being able to see your own DNA on a stick.
Yeah, this reminds me of several examples, but not only am I a car junkie, but I'm very fascinated with space, so this is at least more related to sciences. But there's a show that Tom Hanks directed right after Apollo 13 came out, called From the Earth to the Moon. And there's one of the episodes...
Do you have it on DVD?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, I have it. Yeah. But From the Earth to the Moon, somewhere in like the 7th or the 8th disc or episode, all these astronauts who are trained pilots, they're not, and they have engineering degrees and all that, but they have to go to the moon and collect rock samples. So they sit in a classroom with geologists, and they explain what you need to find, and here you go, I need you to find this rock, and this rock will have these properties. And
so very monotonous.
Very monotonous. Okay. So, and then the guys started complaining. They're like, we're not getting anything out of this. It's boring. I'm not understanding it. So this one of the astronauts did have a professor who he engaged and said, I need you to help me train these astronauts on how to be field geologists. And they didn't do it in a classroom. They went out into the field. They went out into the desert. They collected rocks. They learned baby steps. But by the time they were done, they completely got it. Even the most skeptical of the astronauts. And I know this is a movie, an interpretation, but it's that same thing. Like, all the things that I've ever learned and has stuck with me throughout all the years have been through using my hands and engaging all of my senses, not just my ears and my eyes, but all of them. I want to touch things. I want to smell. That's how, because so many of us learn in very different ways, and it gets captured in different ways. While doing these experiments by hand, as marketers, we also need to remember that we need to engage some of the our other senses. So you can read an article, which is fine, and tell a great story, but now we have the technology to do video. And like, for example, this podcast, instead of writing a really long article, we're choosing to do it with audio. So now we're engaging more of the senses. And I think it's a combination of those things, of taking concepts and distilling them into something that's a lot more accessible, but also presenting them in a way that is more engaging and that is more memorable.
And educational.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was thinking, we just had Jove in here give another presentation on science and how if you read a paper, it's really hard to duplicate an experiment. They said like up to 60% of papers you can't actually replicate the experiment, which is part of publishing, and so that other scientists can do it. And that's the claim for Jove, is by visualizing it step by step on how to do something as if you were there, you're now able to replicate the experiment better.
Yeah.
So yeah, having video can educate, just like this video did, and it certainly can inspire. And it goes back to the overall, if you can do both, I think you have somebody who's going to go buy your product, or go tell somebody about your product,
or have a positive brand reaction to your brand at the very least.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's it. Those were the top 3 tweets for March 2012. Join us next month, and we'll look at the top 3 tweets for April. As always, we encourage comments via our Twitter @competitive. Or you're always welcome to email either Ken or myself. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next month.
Take it easy, Don.
Take it easy, kid.